We won't start without you.
Okay, good.
It's a big group.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we had a lot of students and staff from Summer Gardens. A couple of these folks are staff from coming, and then a couple of these folks are some family students. So, yeah, I mean, the vast many folks are staff for those programs.
That's a lot to bring along, hike and
Yeah,
keep everybody sorted.
it wasn't this size group the whole time. Came out, the gentleman on the far left who's from coming, he just came for this portion of the trip to Shanghai job. And the first leg, St. John, he's okay. It's calm.
Yep.
You know, he was mostly there. So maybe four folks here that weren't with us. Yeah.
Is this a trail or a stream bed?
This is a stream bed.
Dry stream bed?
Yeah, we just hiked along. And first day. So pretty cool. So we're Sarah on the NACPEC trip.
Yep.
Was, yeah.
We did too, but I mean, on Monday.
Well, overnight, Monday morning.
Oh, I know during the day. Yeah. No, so, I was surprised.
Along the stream bed. Because it was along the stream bed. It was like, yeah, kind of sheer.
I see why.
And it's a bit more elevation.
Come in, right? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
We'll give Wally there's a minute still.
Yeah.
Never actually. Well, the best part of that, I usually keep I have an extra tag. And at one point I just said, okay, Mike, here, take it. You're talking about the day. Talk about, yeah, and he just like, exploded it. But he said he had some fun with this. He mostly just didn't like the computer and the office.
That clock on the wall, it's not right. So if you're looking at that one, no, it's like 2 minutes fast or something.
He's that good.
I think it's like 2 minutes ahead. Oh, when I looked, it was 2 minutes ahead.
So can you, like, can other
You ready? Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this Lunch and Learn. My name is Miles Schwartz-Sachs. I'm the assistant curator here at the Arnold Arboretum, and it is my distinct pleasure to get to introduce Madeline Schill to you all today. Madeline Schill is a collections fellow who's working with us with a primary focus of developing, managing, and sharing the institutional archives of the North American China Plant Exploration Consortium, also known as NACPEC. You'll see that word a lot throughout the talk, as well as looking at the archives of plant exploration in the modern era. So the modern era we're considering 1977 through today. This is a collaborative project between the archives and library department as well as curation, and I'm managing this project along with Michael Dosman, Lisa Pearson, and of course Madeline Schill is the real hero here. So this project focused on the utilization and management of a mix of Arboretum assets. It includes our living collection, it includes our herbarium collections, as well as our archival resources. And what we've been working on this project is developing ways to implement new best management practices for our archives and making them more easily accessible to the broader community. And so you're going to hear a lot about that today. Madeline Schill has been working with us since November of 24. And she's done a lot of work so far in the archives, but she's also been in the field with us. She joined us on the 2025 NACPEC expedition to China, serving as the archivist on the trip. And prior to the trip and on the trip, she worked to develop new archival protocols, as well as field observational protocols to make sure that we were capturing vital information about the plant floristic diversity we were seeing, as well as important information about where we were going, who we were working with, and making sure the trip was well recorded for posterity. During this project, she's also had the opportunity to visit many of the NACPEC gardens. She's either has been to or plans to visit all 12 of the institutions that are associated with NACPEC, going, meeting staff there, doing interviews, trying to understand how each of these institutions sees and views NACPEC and the value it brings to their garden, as well as capturing oral histories so that we can hear from the people who have been involved in the past and present with this 35 years running collaboration. Madeline brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective to this position. She holds a master's degree in museum studies from Harvard University, an undergrad bachelor's of science from University of Texas in biology. Before coming to the Arnold Arboretum, she spent 5 years working at Harvard University Herbarium. So we got over on this side of the river to come work with living plants in our archive collections. She also has a special interest in biases in museum and archive collections, where she conducts original scholarship on this topic. She started working on this in her master's degree and continues this outside of her time, even working at the Arnold Arboretum. She's a multi-talented individual who has expertise in disciplines from fine arts to music to ornithology, and is a great person to be in the field with. While we're identifying plants, she can tell us the birds and helping to paint a full picture of the ecology of the places we visit. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Madeline Schill to come up and tell us about her project.
Oh, thanks, Miles, and thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, we should be ready to go. So if anyone has issues hearing me, let me know, but hopefully sound is all good. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to y'all today about the North America-China Plant Exploration Consortium, or NACPEC Expedition to China 2025, and the archival project that I've been working on here since November of 2024. So what is NACPEC? You've heard the acronym. It's a long acronym. And what is it? We'll start with the mission. We have a mission to ensure the preservation of Chinese and North American botanical biodiversity through cooperative and collaborative plant exploration, the exchange of germplasm, scholarly research, and professional development to enhance the genetic diversity of our living collections and secure plants for the future in adherence to the spirit of the Convention of Biological Diversity. We, kind of jumping straight into the bylaw goals, in the past year, NACPEC has been kind of revitalizing itself and planning ahead for the future. So a committee was formed within the NACPEC members to create bylaws that we would adhere to from now on in the years to come, and they kind of embody the standards and mission that NACPEC has already had, but put it into words. I won't read through them all, there's 9, but basically focusing on ex situ and in situ conservation of plants of globally rare species, facilitating germplasm acquisition of North America taxa for Chinese collaborators and vice versa, maintaining high standards of documentation, which comes into play a lot with the archives, and then conducting and sharing annual inventories and supporting collaborative research using the germplasm and plants that we have collected over the years. So NACPEC began, it started, in people's minds, I think, after a 1988 trip to Huangshan, China, where the realization occurred that in order to be able to successfully travel to China, collect germplasm, and work with partners there, some sort of consortium needed to be formed, some sort of official collaboration and partnership between North American gardens and Chinese gardens had to be formed. So after several years of conversation between some major gardens, including the Morris Arboretum, the U.S. National Arboretum, and Holden Arboretum, which is now Holden Forests and Gardens, a negotiating trip occurred in 1991 where Paul Meyer, the tall man in the back from Morris Arboretum, Lawrence Lee right in front of him from the U.S. National Arboretum, and Peter Bristol from Holden, went to China to meet with colleagues there and researchers, visit their facilities. They visited botanical gardens. They went scouting in natural areas to see where they might want to start collecting in future years. And they basically just formed solid relationships with the people there, made promises to collaborate with them, exchange germplasm and personnel, and planned for more or less the next 5 years of expeditions. So NACPEC was born. In 1993 and 1994, the Arnold Arboretum joined. So at this point, Peter Del Tredici participated on the first NACPEC expedition to Wudongshan, or the first NACPEC expedition that the Arnold participated in to Wudongshan. There's this iconic photo of him with Acer Griseum, which was one of the first ones I had seen, and also one of the first pictures I had seen of Peter before I met him in real life. But that started a long-standing relationship that the Arnold has had with NACPEC and with the gardens that make up NACPEC. Today we have Miles, who is the chair of NACPEC, so a lot of like the brainstorming and kind of thought behind NACPEC's current and future starts here at the Arboretum, but it's a very collaborative process. We always have everyone from the member gardens involved. These are our member gardens. As of November 2025, we have 9 all throughout US and then UBC Botanical Garden in Vancouver. And then at our last annual meeting, we voted in a new garden, a new member garden of NACPEC, which is University of California Botanical Garden at Berkeley. NACPEC has gone on, actually I'm going to jump ahead real fast to this map. This shows our member gardens, including UC Berkeley. You can see that there's a large focus in sort of like the central or eastern Midwest to eastern coast, and then we have UBC in the top left in Vancouver, and then now UC Berkeley in California. The benefit of having so many different gardens, part of this consortium, is that the plants we acquire in China can be tested out in different plant hardiness zones across North America. Something that doesn't work here in Boston might work great in Vancouver and vice versa. And so you kind of, we can see a greater success of the plants that are collected. The target genera that NACPEC goes after can be a little bit broader. Of course, each garden kind of has what works for them, but you can also test things out and see how they go. I'll go back a little bit to our expeditions. So after the 1991 negotiating expedition, the first real expedition, I guess, where collections were made occurred in 1993 in Heilongjiang, which is in a northern province in China. Since then, there have been 18 collecting trips where NACPEC members from North America have gone to China, 3 contract collecting trips where we've had a contract collector in China collect and provide germplasm to North American gardens, and then 2 scouting trips, and I'm counting the 1991 trip as a scouting trip, where it was mainly observation-based and relationship building. And our past trip last year in 2025 was mainly a scouting trip as well, where we went in the springtime to see areas where target genera were growing, see what we might want to collect, and then have our partners collect them in the fall when things are seeding or in fruit. That's obviously different from the general style of collecting trip. Typically, to collect seed, you go out in the fall when things are fruiting or seeding. That way you can actually collect them and bring them back. But because it's become slightly more difficult to collect in China, it's harder to require the permits. This spring scouting trip was kind of a test run to see what might be feasible for the future of NACPEC. While country relationships might be more strained, collecting in general is a bit more difficult. There's more of a culture of, I guess, keeping your cultural property, and plants often count as cultural property within nations. So it was sort of a test drive of this sort of scouting trip for the future. This is a distribution of collecting trips since 1993. As you can see, most of them have been in China, but there was one in 2019 where we actually had our Chinese partners come to North America and collect seed in the Appalachians across multiple states. The stars are not exactly where they were collecting. I was trying to highlight the states without covering the names. But you can see in the map of China as well, a lot of the collecting is focused in sort of like central eastern China. And that is mainly because what grows there's a high amount of diversity, plant diversity in that region. And what grows there tends to be able to grow in the NACPEC gardens based on where we're located in North America. But there have been some cases where, if we push more south or more west, you can kind of test the hardiness of the plants that are growing there. We saw this map, and now we're going to jump right into the NACPEC Archival project. So that was kind of a quick overview of what NACPEC is and what it has done up to this point. I was brought here in 2024, and this was the NACPEC archive that I found. So we ended up at the Arnold. In 2012, there was a decision made in the consortium to consolidate archival materials and deposit them in one place. That way, it could all be kept together, and the Arnold was selected because it has a great archive and library. The materials would be protected, they would be well managed, and the Arnold was willing to take on the responsibility. So in 2012, archival materials were deposited here. From then on until about 2023, there was some initial archival processing done and the creation of an initial finding aid, which is the document that if you're looking to research something in an archive, it'll tell you where to look, literally the physical locations of the boxes and what's in them. When I joined in 2024, I was met with about 6 boxes of material, about 4.5 linear feet, and the material within these boxes is a lot of correspondence, paper documents, plant lists, maps, ephemera that was collected during expeditions and things like that were more or less well organized, but we wanted to think of the end user and how a researcher or a scholar or anyone within the curation team might want to use this collection. And so we began the process of reorganizing and processing the material. I'm also going to jump ahead. Archival processing, when we speak about that, is the process of taking materials you have in an archive and creating a finding aid so you know how to find those materials. Typically, when you're given archival materials, from, say, someone who is retired or someone who has donated their materials to you, oftentimes the most common approach is to keep it as is and document it in the finding aid as is. But as with the NACPEC archive, we were thinking of end user or end use, user end use. We wanted to make sure that the NACPEC archives, because they were kind of being consolidated from many different gardens, made sense and weren't kept in the order that we got them in. How to do this is to assess what you have, create a preliminary inventory to see what materials you have, and then a processing plan to decide how you're going to approach them. Then you move into the arrangement phase, which is rehousing, moving things that might not be in an archival box into archival boxes, labeling folders and boxes with the appropriate order if you've moved them into a different order, and then eventually doing finding aid data entry where you're describing the materials. And one of our goals has been to describe at the item level, which means every single piece of paper in the archive has a description that has been written for it. And then the entire collection we've also wanted to have digitized. That way you don't have to come to the Arnold to be able to access it. Any one of our member gardens in NACPEC or even our partners in China will be able to access the collection digitally through the digital finding aid. Our end goal is access. So that has been the motivation between how to arrange the collection and how we ultimately want to distribute the information that's in the collection. The NACPEC Archival project, not only does it involve the archival collections, as Miles mentioned, it also involves living and preserved collections, which are the herbarium vouchers that were collected during these expeditions in addition to seed germplasm, and knowledge access and sharing. So what we're doing today is part of that knowledge access and sharing part of the project where we want to get the information out there about NACPEC, about the archives, and make sure that people can use it. And yes, so this is sort of a look at what has been done in this first year of the project. So when we finished the initial inventory with two Bennington interns, Jay Clark and Jester Wren, who were with us last year, we counted just under 2,000 individual items in the NACPEC collection. At the end of last year, beginning of this year, that should say January 2026, the collection grew almost 2 times, and we have over 3,000 individual items. This was accomplished by reaching out to people who had been involved on NACPEC expeditions, reaching out to member garden archives to see if they had materials that they would want to deposit here with the rest of the official NACPEC archive. With that, the acquisition of new materials, processing them into the collection, and also reorganizing the collection, we were able to grow physically the collection by maybe 1.5 times, 4.5 to 7 linear feet. Now we have 9 boxes, plus a couple of, it's a little hard to see, but ephemera boxes at the end where larger pieces of 3D ephemera that were collected on expeditions were housed into these little boxes. And those are actually beer can, a tall beer can, and beer bottle caps. And they get their own boxes. In 2025, we had 26 individual contributors that gave material to the NACPEC archives. Those include only the individuals. There's also the Morton Arboretum archive that has been hugely helpful in going through their own collections and sharing with us digital copies of materials that they have in their own archive. UBC Botanical Garden as well has given us some materials that we'll keep digitally, but we won't keep the physical copies. So it's also been, not only is it a collaboration, NACPEC, a collaboration of institutions to collect germplasm, but it's become a collaboration between the archives to actually see what we have, make sure everything is in the official NACPEC archive repository, and just share material and resources, because oftentimes if you don't do this sort of project, you might not know exactly what you have in your collection. The NACPEC archives have been divided more or less into these categories. Within each box, you'll find folders, and the folders have these headers. So for every expedition that was done with NACPEC, it will have an administrative folder, a correspondence folder, meeting minutes and notes, plants, plant lists, plant information, resources and research that was used to prepare for an expedition, to know where they wanted to go, what regions they wanted to collect in. Then you have the material generated from a trip, so field journals, trip reports, photographs, and whatever ephemera was collected. We have also a publicity folder, which houses anything that was published about an expedition after it happened. So Arnoldia articles, newspaper articles, anything like that. If we have the materials, it will go in there. So we are able to cover not only the preparation of a trip and the actual execution of a trip, but also the follow-up to a trip. What happens in, I would say since about 2002, 2005, is you introduce digital photography. And so this is the same graph, but when we introduce born digital materials, which is anything, photographs taken with a digital camera or digital emails, anything created digitally. Because it's so easy to make digital materials, they can be exponential inside a collection. And so it's been, a separate project within this project to learn and figure out how we want to approach processing born digital materials, just because of the sheer quantity. It's almost impossible to go through everything. In the final result of the processing of the collection is a finding aid, and we have a digital finding aid located on Hollis for archival discovery. Every single item in the NACPEC archive has a record. You can sort through the boxes, through the folders, and look at individual pieces of correspondence and read a description about them. It tells you exactly where they're located in the physical collection. And we're currently working on digitizing this collection through a grant with Harvard Imaging Services. So eventually on this page, you will also be able to see a digital scan or file of the actual item. So it will be all in one place. But as of right now, it is descriptive information and location information, which is already hugely helpful if someone is wanting to know what to look for. The benefit of using ArchiveSpace or Hollis for archival discovery is that every single word in the description is searchable. So if you want to find anything about Tsuga chinensis in the NACPEC archives, you can type it into the search box, and any record or item that has that phrase in it will appear. So it also makes it really easy to sort through what is there if you're looking for places, plants, names, anything like that, years. The living collections and the living and preserved collections portion of this archival project has, as Miles mentioned, also allowed me to visit a lot of the NACPEC member gardens. Last year I conducted 6 garden visits, not including the Arnold because I'm here, but from top left, we have the Morton Arboretum, Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania, and then UBC Botanical Garden in Vancouver. And then at the bottom, we have the Morris Arboretum. We have the Dixon Prairie at Chicago Botanic Garden. And then this is an image of Chanticleer, which, oh my gosh, am I saying that right? Sorry, it is Chanticleer, sorry. Chanticleer Gardens in Pennsylvania, which is not a NACPEC member, but Bill Thomas, who is their executive director, was on NACPEC expeditions. So I went there, met him, chatted with him, and was able to record an oral history. The benefit of these garden visits has also been to capture oral histories from staff members and people who have gone on expeditions either in the past or currently, to capture their perspectives on NACPEC and their experiences in their own voice. A major motivation for the NACPEC archival project was the fact that the consortium is now 35 years old. A lot of people involved are retiring or in some cases passing away. And we wanted to make sure that we could capture a comprehensive overview and just perspective of the consortium from its beginning by people who were there. So at each of these gardens, I was able to meet with people who had been on NACPEC expeditions, meet with people who had worked with NACPEC plants, even if they hadn't been on an expedition, with curators and collections managers, and just hear about their perspective of the consortium, the impact it's had on their institution, and any other anecdotes, things like that, that don't necessarily come through the physical archives. This is the recording equipment for the oral histories. I spent an absurdly long time looking for the perfect microphone to capture audio, and it's so simple to use, but it has been perfect because for a lot of these visits, since I'm going to their gardens, we're able to wear these little microphones and walk around the garden and look at the plants as we're talking about them or as we're talking about the consortium. Since I started going on the garden visits last year. I've completed 23 oral histories, 17 long form, which they tend to run about an hour, hour and a half if they're long form, and then 6 shorter interviews in the field during the China expedition last year. These have just been a treasure trove of information, and the end goal with these is to incorporate them into some sort of NACPEC webpage where we can hear snippets of people in their own voices talking about NACPEC and the impact it has had. For the living and preserved collections, a huge portion of that was finding out where all of the herbarium vouchers that were collected during NACPEC resided. Well, we kind of knew where they resided, but finding out which institutions had which specimens, and especially the Harvard University Herbaria in Cambridge, making sure that their NACPEC specimens were annotated appropriately if they needed to be updated and digitized. So I spent a few weeks last year going to HUH and pulling all of their NACPEC specimens that I could find, and then the curation staff there was really kind to digitize them. So now those are also all available on their GBIF presence. I got these photos of me pulling the specimens because they have an Instagram and they wanted to do a little photo shoot for their Instagram page. So I stole a few of those photos from them with permission. In addition to just digitizing the Harvard University Herbaria vouchers, all of the voucher inventory information from Morris Arboretum, Morton Arboretum, the U.S. National Arboretum Herbarium, and HUH have been compiled to create a complete inventory of the NACPEC vouchers that we have. This is the existing GBIF presence of the HUH NACPEC vouchers. You can go here and download the entire data set and see every single voucher that they have. The goal ultimately is for all vouchers across all of the herbaria to be in one place, and we're hoping GBIF will be the place for that. That's another thing that's in the works for this year. As I said right here, complete NACPEC GBIF presence. With the living and preserved collections, there's an annual NACPEC inventory of the living plants in member gardens collections that we're hoping to kind of revitalize and make it more easy to submit their information and visualize where plants are. And as I mentioned before, have an updated NACPEC webpage on the Arnold Arboretum website. So one thing that has come up with this archival project is the question of how to document future expeditions with a preservation mindset. As you can imagine, archives are often built in bulk when someone retires and gives you all their material, or when someone finds the box in their attic with all their research or something and gives it to you. Archival collections are often built that way. With NACPEC, we don't have a static collection. It is being grown every time there's a new expedition, and so we wanted to come up with a way to document the expeditions, especially in a digital age when you can create so much documentation, in a way that's actually going to be useful, make sense, and be able to continue building the archival collection with the level of data description that we have done retroactively with what exists. So for this 2025 expedition, we tested out a method of documentation that has long existed in NACPEC, but just had never really been written down as an official standard. Miles, Michael, Lisa, and I, and the rest of the NACPEC members at a certain point looked at, Miles and I worked together to create these roles, kind of dividing up the roles on an expedition by a title, gave them a description, gave them responsibilities, and then passed it around with the group to see if it would be something that they would want to try during the 2025 scouting expedition. The 8 roles that we kind of came up with, or that exist, but we gave names to, are the expedition leader, the treasurer, plant recorder, so the person writing down all of the plant information that's either observed or plants that are collected, the germplasm and herbarium collectors who are doing the actual collecting of germplasm and vouchers in the field, the chronicler who's writing daily journal entries of what was done that day, which is hugely helpful, retroactively to know what happened on an expedition. The photographer, which we split into core content photographer and plant photographer, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. and the trip archivist, which was my role, but basically post-trip, it's the person who's in charge of making sure the roles, people know what their roles are, and that they are compiling and giving you the archival materials to put in the archive after a trip. So for the core content photographers, we saw the issue of having so much digital material from earlier expeditions that had not really been vetted, and you end up with a lot of blurry photos or photos that you just don't know what it's supposed to be or who it is or where they are. So we came up with these categories for people to aim towards, to take pictures of the people on an expedition, places that we had been, notable sites and events that were seen, and exemplar plants, and limit it to about 15 per day for each category. The goal of this was to, of course, limit how much digital images we get in an expedition per day, but also to make it a conscious effort on the part of the expedition team to know what to take good and important pictures. Not that they aren't, but just to make it a more conscious thing, to know that their photographs are going to be deposited in an archive and used. We also had every person who took photographs and submitted them write their own description and metadata for the photographs. So when we were processing the archive, it wasn't up to the librarian or archivist or cataloger to try to figure out what was going on in a photo. We had words directly from the photographer themselves explaining who's in the photo, where they are, and why they took the picture. So this brings us to the 2025 expedition when we actually kind of put this into practice. And this is going to be, I'll talk a little less about archival things and more just about the expedition itself. But throughout the entire expedition, every single day, someone was assigned a role that they had to complete, whether it be a photographer, chronicler, where they're writing down what happened. And at the end of the trip, they compiled all their materials and gave them to me as the trip archivist. We have this really cool photo. I think it was probably one of the coolest photos we took in Shenangjia of the team, where we can see basically everyone. So from the Arnold, there was myself, Miles, and Michael Dozeman. Holden Forest and Gardens, we had Tom Arbor and Connor Ryan. From Longwood Gardens, we had Tony Aiello. From the Morton, we had Kim Shear, and then from UBC Botanical Garden, we had Andy Hill. Those were the North American NACPEC members. And then our partners that we worked closely with and saw pretty much every day, was Wang Kong from the National Botanical Garden, Beijing, Li Pan from Zhejiang University, and then two of his graduate students, Zhang Xutang and Lin Yan. And then from Kunming Institute of Botany, with us for a few days of the trip was Deng Tao and Liu Chun. Kong and Pan were hugely instrumental in organizing this trip and were our main partners and basically made sure we were all safe and got from point A to point B every day, as well as sharing their botanical knowledge with us while we were there. We had a pretty long trip. It was about 2 weeks, where we started in Shanghai, traveled southwest to Hangzhou Botanical Garden and visited Zhejiang University. We spent a couple days botanizing in Tianmushan in that area, and then we took a plane out west to Yichang and then drove to the Shenangjia Mountains for the second locality of botanizing. We botanized there for a few days. Took another plane to Xi'an, botanized in the Qinling Mountains for a couple days, and then eventually took a high-speed train up to Beijing, where we saw the National Botanical Garden, Beijing, and then from there everyone dispersed and went home. So within all of these travel days and botanizing days, I think we had around 6 full days of botanizing, but the travel days also became botanizing days because we were a very efficient group. As I mentioned, we had these roles that we had established for this expedition. The ones that we were really focusing on testing out and getting feedback from the group on were the plant recorder role, whoever was going to write down the plant names, chronicler, the photographers, and then the trip archivist. So, yeah, we're jumping right into the expedition now. Miles, Michael, and I arrived on May 8th. We had 2 travel days, basically May 7th and May 8th. And so we had a couple days before the rest of the NACPEC group joined us on the 10th to just explore Shanghai a little bit. I had actually lived here in the past, so it was really interesting and weird for me to come back to Shanghai after almost 8 years, I think, and just seeing how much it had changed. We Did a little bit of exploring of Yew Garden, where we saw some Acer bridgerianum and Terracaria, wingnut. It was our first, sort of plant excursion, but it also had these beautiful rock gardens and historic buildings. It's in the old town of Shanghai, so not only is the garden very, very ancient, but the surrounding town is built up to look very ancient, kind of match. So we had fun walking around there. And something that we didn't expect to see, but our noses alerted us to, was this chocolate sculpture display. When we were walking through the village, or through the old town, it was pretty amazing. And I still don't really understand what it was or why it was there, but it was very, very cool. And as we continued walking through a park, we saw this huge Fraxinus hupaiensis that has a very bonsai shape, but it's just massive. And it had signage calling it a living fossil and the king of bonsai, which I thought was pretty interesting. This picture of Miles and Michael is in front of the Bund. Well, I guess we're standing on the Bund, which is the colonial side of Shanghai, where during the late 18th, early 19th centuries, or late 19th, early 20th centuries, it was built up as kind of like an economic and trade hotspot. And so there's all these old colonial buildings, and then across the river, you see the new skyscrapers downtown area. It's very picturesque, and that view shed hasn't changed very much since I lived there, so it was very nice to see again. My favorite little part about the ash tree that we saw was actually in its trunk. It was hollowed out, and kind of there was a cavity where a little stray cat was living, and I loved to see it. The following day, we had a chance to visit the Shanghai Botanic Garden, which is the older botanic garden in Shanghai that has been around for, I think, around 50 years. They have this incredible bonsai impinging collection with just hundreds of plants. It was huge. And they had recently renovated their north end of the garden with these two cold houses, biomes. One was sub-alpine, and one was a montane cold house that we got to see. So it was our first, I guess our second garden visit, because Yew Garden was our first. But we got 2 checked off before the rest of the group even arrived. That evening on the 10th, the rest of the NACPEC team joined us, and so on the 11th, we went to the Shanghai Chenshan Botanic Garden, which is about 30 kilometers outside of Shanghai, built in 2012 or 13. It's a very new garden, and I had actually been there when it was first built, and it was incredible to see just how much bigger the trees were now that it's kind of been established for around 15 years. We had our first team picture in the Rose Garden, and we got to see these really incredible conservatories that they had built. One for like succulents and cacti, it was very arid, and then one was more tropical. We had a meeting with their director, Dr. Hu Yonghong, and in their herbarium, so we got to visit their herbarium, chat with the director, and he was the director when they established this garden, so he's kind of been part of the brains behind it from its establishment. And just the conversation we had with him was interesting. Shanghai is a flat plain right next to the ocean. There's one random mountain in this area where they've had a quarry built. And he said one of their biggest issues is just the lack of soil in that area because it's so flat, and they needed to add, I think it was something 9, 10 meters of soil just to be able to plant trees in there that could stay upright, that they could have something to latch onto. In the evening, they were having a little, like a concert that was being live streamed on TV. So we got to actually stay there all the way through sunset and watch an orchestra play really beautiful music for a couple hours, and that was unexpected and really, really nice. The next day, we went to Zhejiang University. We had lunch with the College of Life Sciences, some of their professors and researchers, and just had a really great conversation hearing about the work that they're doing and sharing with them the work that NACPEC and our individual gardens were doing. Li Pan works here at Zhejiang University, and he was one of our biggest collaborators on this trip. So it was great to kind of see his home turf where he does a lot of his work and just meet some of the folks that he's also working with. They were all very excited about the research they're doing and the research that we're doing. We had a chance to visit Hangzhou Botanical Garden, where we saw a sequoia that was gifted by President Nixon during his 1972 trip. That's kind of being held up. It needs a lot of support to stay alive there. It has like these two rods that are holding it up, and then the railing around it actually emits steam to try to emulate its natural conditions where it would grow, but it's still going pretty strong. In the evening, we had a chance to see a concert on the lake, or a spectacle on the lake at the West Lake in Hangzhou, where they had musicians and dancers dancing on top of the water, which was a very nice experience as well. May 13th, in the next couple of days here, we did our first, I don't want to call it real botanizing because everyone was botanizing the whole time we were there, but our first botanizing in a more natural area, not at a garden. We went to Tianmushan, and we saw these huge ancient cryptomeria trees. Some of them were 800 years old. They had signage saying that they were just, I think the youngest one no, that's not true. The youngest one with signage we saw was probably around 300 years old. So they were just ancient trees. And on the way there, a really cool thing that we were able to see was also this, the last wild population of Austria rederiana, and it's these 5 individuals here on the right that make up this population, and it's gated off. It has signage to protect it as well. But that was quite special to see. It only grows in this area in Tianmushan. We also had a chance to see the 5-generation ginkgo on this mountain, which Peter Del Tredici had seen and photographed in 1989 when he was here for his postdoc research. And it was just really neat to see. It looks almost the same. I mean, it's grown in the last 40 years, but just a huge ginkgo that you can see as it's gotten older and still survived. It keeps shooting up new trunks further back on the hillside, and the one on the very front is like hanging off the cliff. I only have a couple birds in here. I didn't put that many, but one of the great birds we saw was the black bulbul here through my binoculars on the top of a little dead branch. And this was just to get an idea of the paths that we were walking through this cryptomeria forest. It was really beautiful and very serene, and there were temples up there. The next day, we went to the Tianmu River Valley. There were a lot of plants like Laraceae plants. Michaelis lambergii was an interesting one to me, just because I loved how red, the contrast between the red and the green buds that was happening. It was a tourist destination, so there was a lot of fun things that tourists could do while we were there. So we all took turns, going across these logs, bridges, and actually, Lin Yuan, one of the graduate students, she took a plunge and had to swim across, but she said it was her favorite part of the trip, so she enjoyed it. That evening, this is a better view of sort of the gorge, like the valley that we were seeing with these rocks going all the way up the mountainside. We had trekked along a path all the way up and then came down. And then that evening, we went to the Xixi National Wetland Park, closer to Zhejiang University. It's sort of the natural wetland that existed before that Zhejiang was built up. And Pan was saying that his students had done a count and counted over 1,000 plant species in this area alone. It wasn't a huge land area, it was just hugely diverse. I think 400 of the species they had counted were new and hadn't been identified there before. The next day was a travel day, but it was actually one of my favorite botanizing days. We took a plane from Hangzhou to Yichang and then drove 3 or 4 hours up to Shidongjia, and we stopped a couple times along the way. We were having these beautiful views at this point of the mountains. You can see they're so jagged and just like shooting straight up, and there would be power lines going over the top of them. And it was incredible, the infrastructure that they were able to build in this type of terrain. And the tunnels as well would be miles long, and we would still have Wi-Fi in them. So really, really cool. We saw this panda flower, which I had never seen before, and I thought it was just beautiful, kind of poking out of the rocks. Just really, really beautiful scenery that day. the next day, but it was a travel day, so pretty short, and then we headed up into the Shenangjia National Park the next day. Shenangjia is also hugely diverse. It has 205 endemic species, and we started out the day sort of climbing up the mountainside a little bit to this point where they have a reserve for the golden snub-nosed monkey, which is an endangered monkey that lives in this area. They had told us the bare trees that you're seeing is the result of their herbivory. They eat seeds, nuts, lichen, leaves, and so the whole mountainside where they were living was full of these bare trees. And they actually had greenhouses nearby where they were growing more plants that the monkeys, they could plant out that the monkeys would actually eat, so it was a food source for them. They do a lot to protect these. Along this hillside, there was so much. The lower elevation, there was Malus consuensis, so an apple, Cornus cusa, and then Betula albosinensis, which is here trademarked by its very, very red bark. And then as we drove up to higher elevations, we saw this huge, magnificent Acer suchuinense, which is the tall tree leaning over the road. And you can see we're just stopped along the side of the road. We would have to kind of hop over the railing anytime cars came by. In this 100-foot stretch of road, I think we saw more than half a dozen different Acer species, just so much diversity on the side of the road. I don't even know like half the things that we saw. Actually, most of the things in China, I didn't know what they were because I'd never seen them before. But just incredible plant diversity. For someone who's trying to learn plants, it's every single day it was so much to take in and absorb. That day we also hiked up to this overlook, and there was this sort of cover of rhododendron oreodaxa, and I saw this really lovely bird, Elliott's laughing thrush, which you can maybe see where I circled it, but I found a better picture. It just has this blue eye that is piercing, and it kind of looks angry, but it was very beautiful amongst the rhododendron. That was probably one of my favorite bird sightings of the trip, and that's the last bird I have for y'all, so if you want to see more pictures, I have them, but not here. This day in Shenangjia was also the day we saw our first Davidia involucrata in full bract, I guess. No, I guess bloom, but the white things that you see hanging are the bracts. They kind of flutter like wings, so it's called the dove tree. And it was very beautiful. I didn't actually see this one. I saw a different one later on, but this was a much better picture than the one that I had gotten. It was on the side of the road that we drove past. On the 17th, we headed to Guanmenshan in Shenangjia. This in the center is the archway that we would drive under to enter the park. And this area is known for having like the wild man, the Ye Run. And so what we think is that this is a depiction of the wild man that used to live in Shenangjia, like a mother and child or something like that. But they also had a lot of, I like to joke that it's the disjunct species of like North America's Sasquatch. But just in China, because the plants, we have plants like that, so why not also a Sasquatch? Some of the highlight plants that we saw here, we were kind of walking up this like abandoned road with abandoned research facilities. We had permission to go there, but it was nice because it was quiet in an otherwise touristy area. Everyone was excited about Styrax odoratissimus. I loved that it kind of looked just like a ceiling of flower. It was very low level, this branch, but you could just get up right under it and look up, and it was really beautiful. And then there was a cliff-dwelling rhododendron simsii that stole my look. We were unexpectedly matching, and so I had to get that picture with it. And then we also saw Acer griseum. It was our first Acer griseum that we saw on the hillside, and just had to, there's going to be more, but just Acer griseum appreciation. The beautiful red bark, everyone got pictures with it. It was on a really steep slant, so we all had to kind of like trek up there to get these photos, but just lovely to see in the wild after seeing Peter's iconic photo with it and learning a lot about it since I started working here. On May 18th, we also had some traveling to do. We drove a lot and botanized along the way from Shenangjia to Xi'an. We also made our first seed collection, which was not planned, but we came across this Elaeagnus bachii in fruit. It was very tasty. I tried one, And we stuck it in a bag and took it with us. And I don't have a picture, but Miles had to clean out. We were going on a plane, and Miles had to clean out the fruit in the bathroom of the airport. And it was just a gory mess. The bag was just disgusting, so I didn't envy that job. We also saw these really interesting animal crossings over the road to allow, say, like wildlife passage over the roads, which I thought was kind of beautiful. They had a lot of fake concrete trees that were functional. One was a bathroom. There was like a giant fake tree that was a bathroom. This one's a bridge. So I thought that was very interesting. That same day, we actually took a little pit stop in this gravel work site and walked down a path a little bit. It's where we saw our first land leech, first and only for me, land leech, but we also saw Scrophularia ginnii, which Pan had described. This was the type location, and there was only 3 known localities of this plant in Hubei. So it was really cool to see this plant with him that he had described. From May 19th and 20th, we spent a few days in Taibaishan. We, on the first day, hiked up the Red River Valley scenic area and saw the Domu waterfall, which I think is the largest in the area. The whole time we were walking, there was a lot of ulmus, elm, samaras kind of floating down. And so Kim made 4 elm collections that day of different elms. I actually don't know if they've been identified to species yet, but 4 different ulmus collections were made. And the next day on the 20th, we drove up to the top of this mountain parking lot and then walked all the way down. It probably took us 4 or 6 hours because we were going at a botanizing pace. And we got to see a lot of really cool things on the way, notably this huge Cercidophyllum japonicum that Michael had remembered seeing, I think in 2010 previously, or maybe later than that. And then we also saw these Acer Davidii plants, just leaves, branches hanging with fruit. So those were really great to see. On the 21st, we went to the Taibaishan National Forest Park, and we were able to get on like a hop-on, hop-off bus to go all the way up to the peak of the mountain and come back down. So we were able to hop on the bus, get off, botanize, get back on, go wherever we wanted to go, which was apparently hugely different from how the infrastructure had been in 2008 and 2010 when people had been here before with NACPEC. You can actually see on the right side, there's the road where we would be driving, and then there's a boardwalk on the left side of this ravine, but underneath that boardwalk, you can see the old wooden boardwalk that's really dilapidated and no longer accessible, which is why they built the new one. But just even in these remote areas, there's a lot of tourism in these areas, a lot of new infrastructure being built, and access is actually really, really easy. They have cable cars going up the mountain. At the top, there's like a restaurant and hotel you could stay at. So a lot of just differences from the first time people went there and it was described during a NACPEC expedition. The benefit of going in the spring also is that you can see things in flower. So these rhododendron taibaiense were covering the hillside or the mountainside, but previously on fall trips, they never knew these were there because they were, they didn't know how vast they were covering the mountainside because they were never in bloom, so you couldn't see them from a distance, but we could, and it was very beautiful. At the top of Taibaishan in the Qinling Mountains, we saw this view, which was a beautiful view on its own, but it's also the same view from the 2008 expedition and the cover of Arnoldia Volume 68. It was just interesting to see it with people who had been there before and kind of get their impressions of how much it had changed. I remember Tony Aiello saw this view, and he's the one who took this picture, and never thought he would be back in this spot after so many years. So just it's the plants, but it's also personal experiences that people are having and kind of reliving when they go on these expeditions, and they can share them with us. On the way back down from Taibaishan, we hopped off the bus And we're walking along the boardwalk and saw this really huge Acer griseum growing right off the boardwalk, and just more Acer griseum appreciation. I think there was a collection made from this tree. We have one Acer griseum collection from this trip, and I think it was this tree. That evening, we had our last team dinner as some people were starting to head home, and then we spent the next day in Xi'an, just kind of having like a fun tourist day. We visited the Muslim quarter, tried a lot of food. We rented bikes and biked along the fortress that surrounds the old city of Xi'an. And we had delicious noodles with NACPEC's favorite noodle lady at Shui Xiaoli braised noodles. They were really delicious, and she hadn't seen NACPEC people in a while, but she recognized them. And we had a good laugh over it. It was very nice. On the evening of the 22nd, we took a high-speed train to Beijing from Xi'an, and then the 23rd was spent visiting National Botanical Garden in Beijing. They're working on building a new seed bank, and so we got to tour their temporary labs where they're working right now with their seed bank. They had a beautiful rose garden, and then I left the group early this day, but I was able to take an impromptu visit to their library offices, which were in this beautiful old building, and there was a tomb of someone who had been working, like a prominent figure who had been working there nearby, so I got to see that as well, which was kind of unexpected, but fun. And then on the 24th, we said our farewells, and everyone traveled and went their separate ways home, and this is a beautiful photo that Tom Arbour took at the National Botanic Garden Beijing, which I really love it. I think it's a very nice photo. A few food superlatives. You got to do it. The food was honestly amazing. I didn't have anything I didn't like, but things that stood out, there were these little, well, I couldn't eat them, but these little baozi in the shape of little button mushrooms, which were adorable. The noodles with NACPEC's favorite noodle lady, of course. In Xi'an, there's a special dish where you can rip apart bread and they put a broth on it and it becomes really thick, which I also couldn't eat, but others said it was very good. I can't eat bread. And then it was delicious, but also interesting that they decorated this braised eggplant with sprinkles. Couldn't really taste it. It was delicious, but we got a kick out of that. And then in Xi'an, we visited this incredible like chili oil store, and I think we all took home at least a bottle or a jar of it. It was delicious. Sort of to wrap up the trip, sorry, Miles, we wanted to see how much material we generated from this trip. So once everyone submitted their content, we had just under 400 core content photographs, which is astonishing that 8 people generated only 400 images. It's good because you could get 10,000 images from one person if they're, camera happy or whatever. On average, we had 27 photos per day, and every single one of the photos that we received had descriptions. So this is a photo sent in by Kim Shearer, and the description is Miles Sachs at the Arnold, excited to show the camera his Acer griseum stained hands after touching the bark of a specimen located at the abandoned facility site in Guangmen Mountain Museum Park. We have all the information right there, and now an archivist 10 years down the line doesn't have to try to imagine what was going on in this photo. We know. Since this was a scouting trip and we didn't do too much collecting, we focused on observing taxa, and we had 818 taxa that we recorded, and of those 818, 572 had photographs. This was a bit of a challenge, having one person be the plant recorder and one person be the photographer, but we ended up with about 70% of the species recorded having photographs, which could be better, but I think it's a really great start, and it was our first time testing out this protocol, so we can work out the kinks in future expeditions. There were 6 collections made of Elaeagnus, Ulmus, and Acer griseum. And then I was able to identify 51 species of birds, but there were greater than 90 individual birds that I saw or heard, but just couldn't figure out the actual species, which was fun for me because when I lived in China, I wasn't a big birder, but now I am, so I could kind of go back and see everything for the first time. What's next? We are currently working on continuing developing the NACPEC archives with digitization, but we're also focusing now on modern era exploration, which is anything the Arnold has been any expeditions the Arnold has participated in since 1977 to the present day. We have wonderful Bennington interns, June Muser and Jocelyn Spiggard, who are here with us working on this project, and it's a lot of work, but they have been doing a great job since the beginning of January. I'm planning a couple more garden visits to kind of round out the last of the visits I have to do with Dawes Arboretum, Holden Forest and Gardens, and then the U.S. National Arboretum, and then this whole year will be spent with more knowledge sharing and access, getting things digitized, making things accessible, and doing more things like this where I can share about the project with all of you. So that's the NACPEC Archival project. Thank you all so much for coming. And do we have time for questions? Oh. We're a little bit over, so I don't know if people want to ask questions or just stay after.
Yeah, if you have to leave, feel free to leave. But if you'd like to stay for 3-5 minutes and asking questions, we can do a little Q&A.
Yes.
The NACPEC website, if you go there, can you access the material that you shared today?
Yes, you can access. We don't have the scanned images up there yet, but you can access the records themselves and the descriptions of the records. Just the images themselves aren't there yet. That's what we're working on now. Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
How are you going to preserve the digital images?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Harvard, because we have an extensive library system, has a digital repository service system, the DRS. And it's supported by Harvard, and it's where you can store digital assets for long-term storage and management. So we're actually going to, we have that resource, we're going to use it. It keeps the digital records safe. It makes sure that file formats stay updated and they don't become corrupt over time. And that's going to be where a lot of it is housed, in addition to currently using SharePoint, things like that we have on hand immediately.
So you're not going to attempt to print out
Oh,
those archives?
I don't think so.
But what about the limited number you took on the trip?
Yeah.
Will those be available as images on the screen as well as a digital link?
Yeah, so they will be available digitally. I guess it's up to researchers and within in-house if people want to use them and print them for display or whatever purposes for publication. But they'll be available digitally. Yeah.
All of our images that have been digitized from the library are available for use for non-commercial use. So we welcome you to go into the Hollis Images is where this will live, and download and use what you would like.
I want to step in and just do one thing. I want to acknowledge that all of this work is the result of generous philanthropy and support of Janine Luke, who has been by our side in the library and the archives for years now. And we really are very fortunate to have such good friends. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew how lucky we are to have Janine by our sides. And there are additional projects that are being underwritten by Janine. So if Janine is with us in spirit or online, thank you, Janine.
Talking about his Korea expedition. I'll be sending out an invitation and information in the next couple of days.
And that will be at the high mall.
Yes, that will be at the high mall.
How big was the landing? Did it latch on anybody?
No, but Kim found one in her hotel room that had latched onto her backpack or her boots or something, but no skin, luckily.
And how long was the train ride?
I guess it was 4 hours, about 4 hours. Yeah, it was great. Cool. Thank you.